Welcome to the 5-Minute Photo Class. I'm your host, Jack Allred. Today we'll be talking about depth of field and how to use it to achieve creative effects in your photography. From beginners to pros, photographers are always trying to achieve better focus. The question is, how much of your image can you get into sharp focus? For that matter, how much of it should be? At large distances, nearly everything is equally important and should be in focus if possible. For instance, think about a beautiful landscape or maybe a typical group photo of friends arranged in rows. If you focus on a point near you, some of the other points farther away fall out of focus. At the other end of this continuum, close to the camera, certain things are more important and you'll make choices about what should be in focus. Depth of field is the term that describes the range of what's in focus within an image. The size of this range is determined by 3 factors that I'll talk about in a minute. The closer your subject is to the camera, the smaller or shallower this range will be. The farther away, the larger or deeper it is. To visualize this difference, you might consider the shape of a megaphone. At the end closer to your mouth, the distance across the megaphone is small, corresponding to close distances from the camera. At the other end, the megaphone is wide, corresponding to greater distances. That's as far as I want to take this analogy, but just remember, close equals shallow and distant equals deep. In the space of 5 minutes, I can share only a couple of examples of how to achieve the depth of field you need in a particular photograph. So I encourage you to search the web for this topic. There are hundreds of sites that talk about it, and many of them have great examples. Depth of field is a physical feature of photography that can be described using mathematical formulas. But just like in a math formula, you can change any one of the 3 variables to produce a different result. The most important of the 3 factors is distance from the camera. A second is aperture. The third is the focal length of your lens. For this discussion, I'll assume you understand how to set the aperture and change the focal length of the lens. Here are a couple of real-world examples. In these exercises, don't use the camera's autofocus. Instead, either switch to manual focus or set the camera to use a single focus point within the viewfinder. That way you know exactly what focus point you're using for an image. For the first example, have a friend pose 30 or so feet in front of a busy background outdoors, like a building for instance. Stand about 15 feet from your model. Use a wide angle to normal lens and shoot in normal daylight. Keep the location of your camera, model, and background constant, and vary your aperture through its entire range. You'll need to adjust shutter speed or ISO for a correct exposure. Next, increase the focal length by either swapping lenses or zooming your lens from short to long. In either case, with the focus always on your model, you should see the sharpness of the background change as the focal length increases. Finally, move closer to your subject while leaving the other factors the same. As you do, the background will start to go out of focus more and more. You can use this technique to isolate a person from an unnecessary or distracting background. Usually, the easiest way to do it is increase the focal length. The second activity is to photograph anything in a row, like a row of tires or a picket fence. Position yourself within 10 or 15 feet of these items and shoot at an angle along their length. Pick out one object midway in the series and always focus on this object for the test. Vary the 3 factors one at a time: distance, aperture, and focal length. In this test, you'll notice that some of the area in front of the subject will be in focus, but more of the objects behind the subject will be in focus. This shows you the entire range of your depth of field. How large this range is will depend on how you adjust the 3 factors we're talking about. As a real-world example, if you were really close to someone's face, focusing on the eye might or might not cause the tip of the nose to remain in focus. This is one place your understanding of depth of field could really be important. As another example, when focusing on a distant mountain range, make sure to focus somewhat in front of the mountains. That way your entire foreground is more likely to be in focus in addition to the mountains. Once again, remember, close equals shallow, far away equals deep. This helps you see what's possible to have in focus within a scene, even without viewing it through your camera. I should note that SLR cameras have a button called a depth of field preview. If you manually set your aperture for a photograph using manual or aperture preferred mode, you can use this button to preview what's in focus. It won't make any difference at wider apertures, but it will at smaller apertures. The preview functions by stopping down the lens to the selected aperture, and that makes it increasingly hard to view the scene as the aperture gets smaller because it lets less light through for viewing. To summarize, what's in focus within your image changes with your aperture, distance, and focal length selections. With practice, in no time you'll be very comfortable with depth of field and count it as one of your favorite creative tools. I invite you to listen to the other selections in the 5-Minute Photo Class series. Here's to better photography.